You know that your team sucks and mine is great. It's time for AFFL hate. Gonna make them pits, gonna make them mad. We're gonna do them dirty. AFFL Week 2 in the books. Are you injured? Did you get dinged up this week? Are you out for 4 to 8 weeks? Because everybody else in the NFL is. Rough week for the players. Rough week for the ISIS. Rough week for the picks, which went 2-4. I do believe that is the worst these picks have ever done since I've been making the picks. That drops me to 500 on the season. I promise I'm going to do better next week with the picks. I owe that much to you. Let's get to the games. Hagak, 108.5. ISIS, 74.3. Now, I know that you are all probably rubbing your palms together gleefully, expecting the gnashing of teeth and rending of garments from me right now. But look, losses happen. Happens to the best of us. I am the best of us, and it happened to me, so there you go. I will say this, I'm glad that I'm no longer distracted by the potential of an undefeated season, and, believe it or not, I'll take this loss because I went up against the guy that scored the most points this week, and I would be much more upset if I lost 108 to 106 as opposed to just putting up a total dog week. Great week for a guy, can't deny it. Cutler, awesome game. Marshall and Jeffrey both played, and Marshall was completely unstoppable. Terrence West got in the end zone, 15 points. And the big Browns win. Arian Foster continues to own the Raiders. DeMarco Murray had a great game against the Titans, which was unexpected if you listen to all the experts going into that game, myself included. And Demaryius Thomas, only 12 points. He's actually been held down this year, which means he has even more breakout potential coming. What can you say? Bill had a great week, and then he had a great Tuesday when he traded Torrey Smith for Phillip Rivers. Torrey Smith has 2 points for the entire season. Torrey Smith is clearly the third option in Baltimore right now, and Bill was able to get a top 5 fantasy quarterback for him. Is anybody else waiting for the follow-up email from Gary on which picks Bill is giving up in this trade? I mean, Scott would not have possibly traded a guy in Rivers who will literally score twice as many points as Torrey Smith does this year, right? He wouldn't just make that deal straight up. He wouldn't assume that Breeze is worth every single pick in 2015, and yet a guy who only scores 4 points less a game than Breeze, and is actually outscoring Breeze so far this season, is worth Torrey Smith and his 2 points, right? You know, I'm starting to feel a little bit like the guy in Invasion of the Body Snatchers who I've seen something, that something being that Scott has no idea what it is, and I'm running around screaming my head off about it, and nobody seems to be acknowledging it. Can I at least get some acknowledgement that you also see that Scott is terrible at running his team here? When we pass each other on the road, can you at least flash your high beams at me? Just an acknowledgement that I'm not crazy here, that trading one of the better quarterbacks in fantasy football, who just came off an amazing game against the tough Seahawks defense and is perhaps at his highest value point right now, trading him for a wide receiver who's the third option on a bad offense, who is at his lowest value point right now, is not a good trade? That literally cutting your total points in half on a player position is not a good trade? Does anybody else care about this? Anyways, as for the ISIS, Kaepernick, truly bad game. Lacey, held down by a good Jets run defense. Justin Hunter, that was not the correct move. I overthought it, talked myself right into it. I said, play Ingram or try to wait out Jeffrey, and if Jeffrey doesn't play Zach Ertz. Ertz had a good game with 8 points. Ingram had 16 points on 1 touchdown, averaged about 7 yards a carry. Here's some good news, he broke his hand, and he's out, quote, at least a month. That's cool. AJ Green, out in the first quarter, 0 points. So, while it's true that even if I had the perfect lineup this week, I wouldn't have had enough points to beat Hagak, what we're seeing is the one thing that could potentially hold down the ISIS, and it's the one thing that held me down last year. I have all these superstars. I can't get them all on the field at the same time. Lacey, hurt a little bit last year, hurt in week 1. AJ Green missing a game this week. Jeffrey probably was going to miss a game. Now Ingram is out for 2 weeks. Cobb missed time last year. Cobb had a great game, by the way. 2 touchdowns, 18 points. If I can't get all of these superstars on the field at the same time, even my tremendous depth is going to be tested. That's the only thing that's going to hold me down this year. Injuries. Nice game for the Bills defense, by the way. C.J. Spiller ran back a touchdown, but I get the points for that. And Cody Parkey, double digits, both games he's kicked this year. Only 75 cents. What a value. Anyways, congrats to Bill. He got the win. I didn't. Really not too much to be said about it. Most points in the league, you go up against that, yeah, you're probably going to lose. But again, I'm taking the long view. I'm not that upset about it. That's just how the schedule broke out. You know, we play our division opponents in our first 3 games of the season. I play Runny next week. I easily could have been playing Runny this week and Hagak next week. And if I was playing Runny this week, I would have won 74-64, and I would have been 2-0, and it wouldn't have looked like a problem at all. So, I ain't sweating it. That kangaroo stole my ball. 100.6. Luthbruck, 90.1. The dream has ended for Gary. Tough break to put up 90 and still lose. That Brian Williams luck is back, everybody. We thought maybe it went into hibernation, but no. After wondering if Brandon Marshall was actually going to play on Sunday night and knowing that he would have to go to Akeem Nicks, who put up a 0, by the way, last night, if Marshall didn't play. Marshall not only played, he made an incredible one-handed touchdown catch, followed that up with 2 more touchdown catches. 22.8 points for Brandon Marshall, helping Bry zoom past Gary on Sunday night. And Andrew Luck's game last night, 17.7 points. Not enough to get Gary back in it. Al Morris, 2 touchdowns. And one of those, the other, I think it was Halou who was tackled at the 2, so they bring in Morris, garbage touchdown for Bry, 20 points for Alfred Morris. More than Marshawn Lynch had this week, so that trades an even so far. Rashad Jennings, 9.9 points. Lost a fumble on a swing pass when he was untouched, essentially blowing the game for the Giants. Not too impressive there. Crabtree had a touchdown, 14 points. Great game for Bry all around. Zach Stacy had a touchdown, but on the bench. Bry clearly benching Stacy after I pointed out the problems in St. Louis. That's how influential this podcast is. This podcast moves the needle. This podcast makes things happen. I'm glad to know that you're listening. I'm glad to know you're taking heed. Nice game for Cam. Only 16 points, but if you watch the game, really great throws. Really look impressive. And it's nice to have Cam going because Nick Foles is holding back the Eagles' offense. I know that sounds weird when Phillies put up 30 points 2 weeks in a row and has set some NFL record for the biggest comebacks to start the season in 2 games in a row. But this Eagles team has guys running up and down the field wide open. Foles is taking too long. He's making bad reads. He's making bad throws. He's holding this team back. Could be a lot more points coming out of Philly. As for Gary, Toby Gerhart, 7 carries for 8 rushing yards, 1.7 points. Cordero Patterson was the focus of the Vikings offense this week. That made him the focus of the Patriots defense, 5.6 points. And my God, is Matt Castle bad. Holy shit, is he terrible. Edelman, 15 points. Can't keep the guy down. What do I know? Pete Garçon, 1.2 points. Gary emailing me privately to wonder why Garçon is so bad this year. What can be done about it? I said, hey, buddy, nothing. Julius Thomas back in the end zone, 9.9 points. Justin Tucker, 14. The Patriots defense. Remember how I mentioned just a second ago how bad Matt Castle was? 25 points for the Patriots defense. And it could have been 31 because on one interception, Devin McCourty was tackled at the 1-yard line. They could have had 2 defensive touchdowns. That's how awful Matt Castle is. So, tough game for Gary. Scores 90, loses by 10. Had an amazing game from his defense. You kind of don't want to let those opportunities go by. And I'm sure what Gary doesn't want to think of is that Gerhart had 1.7 points in the starting lineup, and Jeremy Hill had 15 points on the bench. And that if Jeremy Hill played instead of Gerhart, who is terrible, Gary would have won. I mean, Gary, from me to you here, try not to think about the fact that Toby Gerhart was the 9th overall pick. You put him in the lineup, and because you did that instead of Jeremy Hill, that you lost. Try not to think of the fact that you put Gerhart in the lineup because MJD broke his hand or whatever and was going to miss this game, and that you had to cut MJD in favor of Stephen Taylor, who had a 0. And that only a month ago, Gary, were you so adamant that you'd be able to trade MJD for, quote, a high draft pick, first or second round. In fact, you kept the faith. You didn't stop believing that you wouldn't be able to trade Maurice Jones-Drew for a first or second rounder until the second round was actually over. And I love that kind of optimism in a person. Keep that. Keep that candle burning in your eye. Don't let go of it. Don't become a cynic like me. Don't think about the fact that you blew this game with a roster decision. Don't think about the fact that you went from hoping you could trade Maurice Jones-Drew for a high draft pick to cutting him in favor of Stephen Taylor, the third option for the Arizona Cardinals. Keep the dream alive. Riggins-Riggs, 92.3. The Ass Tanner, 88.5. I don't want to say I smell a conspiracy. I know when I checked the rosters on Friday, Darren Sproles was not in the starting lineup for the Ass Tanner. I'm pretty sure, although I could be wrong, when I checked them on early Sunday, Chris Johnson was in and not Darren Sproles. And yet last night, as I'm looking at things, there's Darren Sproles running up and down the field, putting up 178 total yards plus a touchdown for 23.8 points. Slowly but surely closing the gap on Riggins-Riggs, getting a late screen, breaking it all the way down to the 10. And if that one breaks into the end zone, Ass Tanner comes back and wins this game. I don't want to say there's some sort of Albert family conspiracy where they're changing their roster players after the fact. I'll leave that for you to decide. I'm just going to throw it out there. You know, an irresponsible allegation. I'm just throwing it out there, and whatever happens with it, happens with it. But Riggins-Riggs were able to hold things off. They were not harmed by the fact that they played Jake Locker over Andy Dalton. And Jake Locker was terrible. All the talk, all last week, Titans looked good beating the Chiefs. The Cowboys looked historically inept. Titans are going to run up and down the field on the Cowboys. Get all your Titans in the lineup. Get Jake Locker in there. Get Justin Hunter in there. Get Kendall Wright in there. Don't get Sean Green in there. I mean, he's terrible. But still, get everybody else in there. Lo and behold, the Cowboys dominate this game from the opening gun. And let me tell you, every time they cut over to it on red zone, Jake Locker looked terrible. Staring down his receivers the whole game. Not checking his reads. And if that receiver he was staring at was covered, he did one of two things. He forced it into double coverage for an incompletion, or he just threw it away. Just a garbage game all around. Matt Forte, only 3.6 points. That's a little surprising. I thought he'd be able to get moving on San Francisco, but he wasn't. Nate Freese, 1 point. He's now 2 for 5 on field goals for the year. Looks like the Lions are going to cut him. And only 6 points from the Texans defense. Kind of disappointing when you go up against Oakland. So how did Barker win this game? He did it with Jordy and Jimmy. Jimmy Graham, 23 points. When the Saints were down and looking bad, they went to the, quote, big brother offense. Kind of offense, if you're playing backyard football and you're losing the game and you're tired of losing, you just throw it to your big brother and over. That's what Breeze was doing, just force-feeding Graham. It was totally unstoppable. 118 yards, 2 touchdowns, 23 points. Jordy Nelson, 209 yards, an 80-yard touchdown right between the defense, and then he cut in. He was gone 26.9 points. And Dez, he got a touchdown, 16.3 points. Hurt his shoulder early. Looked like he was going to go out. If he had stayed out, Barker would have lost this game, but he came back, toughed it out, 16 points. Great game for Dez. Ass Tanner, they got close. It would have been incredible if they won this game by a few points, with the difference being Percy Harvin's touchdown run, on which he stepped out of bounds. Alas, that good story did not come to pass. Harvin did get a touchdown that he shouldn't have, but it didn't matter in this one. Cardinals defense, 16 points. That's nice. Dan Bailey, 14 points. That's nice. But no Sean. Out with a dislocated elbow, 0.4 points. Mark Colston, 0 points. Saints outdoors on the road. That's a bad deal. If Ass Tanner would have listened to me and played Chris Ivory and Chris Johnson, take out Colston, take out No Sean, he wins this game. That's what happens. You don't expect a guy to dislocate his elbow in the middle of the game. Happens to the best of us. By the way, with No Sean out about 8 weeks, Lamar Miller gets a big boost. Now the number 1 option in a decent Miami offense. And I'll tell you, Lamar Miller can be had by trade. And I'll point this out. This is his lowest possible value right now. His value is about as low as Torrey Smith's, but every good game he has, that value goes up. And let me tell you something else. I checked the schedule. He plays 5 or 6 bad defenses in a row. Don't sit on your hands. If you need a back, Lamar Miller can be had, and the price is only going to go up, up, up from here. So think quickly. Be proactive. Don't be reactive. Separate yourself from the rest of the league. I know Scott needs this back. I know Scott would like to have Lamar Miller. Scott has literally nothing left to trade, so it's going to have to be somebody else. If you want Lamar Miller, drop a line. The Whitechapel Rippers, 74.9. Timmy doesn't have any friends, / Scott doesn't have any idea, 50.8. Whitechapel, 2-0. Looking great this year. Looking unstoppable. Doesn't even matter that Shane Vereen, the hero for the Patriots last week, only had 4 points because the Patriots, as is their wont, made Ridley their feature back this week. What are you going to do about it? Gio Bernard, 22.9 points. He was looking incredible. For Timmy doesn't have any friends, Drew Brees, 14.2 points. On the bench, Geno Smith, 16.4 points. Phillip Rivers, since traded for a wide receiver who's put up 2 points so far this year, 23.1 points. That's right, Drew Brees, who was worth 16 draft picks, was Scott's third best quarterback this year. So once again, let's play our favorite game. Would this game have been any different if Scott didn't make the trade for Brees? And the answer is, once again, no. Scott would be 0-2 with or without Drew Brees. And in fact, this week, he would have put up even more points. Adrian Peterson, a 0 on the bench. Danny Amendola, a 0 in the lineup. Vikings have decided that Adrian Peterson has been punished long enough. He missed 1 game for which he was paid. He's going to be back in the lineup this week, at least so they say at this point. If you ask me, missing 1 NFL game that you still get paid for is a bit of a lighter punishment than being hit with a stick by somebody who's 3 times your size. But what can I say? As for the rest of this lineup, Woodhead, 6 points. Lynch, 12 points. He got in the end zone, but not that great of a game. Pierre Thomas, 3 points. Maybe he'll get better next week now that Mark Ingram's out of the way. Kendall Wright, the new recipient of a 3-year contract, 3 points. For Timmy and Scott, who signed Kendall Wright to a 3-year contract, and Timmy, who signed Kelvin Benjamin to a 2-year contract, which he had hoped was 3 years, you guys realize that there's no raises for the first 4 weeks of the season, right? If you give a guy a contract or extend him in week 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's the same price. And that if you wait till week 5 or 6, the price goes up a little bit, but not a lot. It's not until you get to like week 9 when you offer these contracts that you really get hurt with the raises. So I would maybe wait till week 4. Let a guy have 1 semi-decent game that really was only buoyed by a touchdown. You take away that touchdown, he had 5 points last week. Kendall Wright has 3 points this week. Now you've locked him up for 45 more games. I would maybe exercise a little more patience before throwing these contracts out. But that's me. I'm just a guy who knows what he's doing. Timmy doesn't have any friends. 0-2. I thought last week things couldn't get worse. I thought Monday morning things couldn't get worse. Then I saw the Rivers trade this morning. Lo and behold, things got worse. People want to call Child Protective Services, have Adrian Peterson's kids taken away. I want to call Fantasy Protective Services, have this team taken away from Scott so it can't be abused anymore. This is awful. This is cosmically gigantic mismanagement of a team. Just absolutely awful. It's always runny in Philadelphia, 64.1. Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, 59.7. Or 50.7, depending on which defense you want to give them credit for. Let me touch on that scheduling thing once again. It's always runny in Philadelphia, currently 2-0, leading the Eastern Division. They've scored 75 and 64 points. Might be a little bit of fraud to that record. If they played me this week, I'd be 2-0, they'd be 1-1. Again, this is why I'm not so bent out of shape about this week. It's a nice thing that Runny did get the win, despite their 64 points, because Sean Green got into the lineup with 4 points. And Vincent Jackson stayed in the lineup, as I predicted, with 5 points. If you missed Friday or you've forgotten it under a flood of Bud Light, I said on Friday that Minnie Barker should bench Vincent Jackson because Josh McCown is so bad. And I would consider putting in Eric Decker against the Packers' bad defense, or Ahmad Bradshaw against a really bad Eagles defense. And then I said, further to wit, that Barker would not do that simply because I suggested that he would do it. He would be stubborn and dig his feet in and do what he wanted. Sure enough, that is what he did. And Vincent Jackson had 5 points. Ahmad Bradshaw had 21 points. Eric Decker had 12 points. But when you play Tim, ignoring terrific advice and making colossal roster mistakes doesn't hurt you. Moneyball, 8.9 points. Again, not a great runner. Deshaun Jackson got hurt. Can you imagine that? 1.9 points. Michael Floyd, 1.9 points. Drew Stanton could not get hit in the ball. Kelvin Benjamin, 4.6 points. Same point I made on Kendall Wright. You have 4 weeks to evaluate these guys at the same cost. Don't throw the contracts at them after just one good game. Let's see if they can have 2, maybe even 3 good games. Or hey, go nuts, see if they can have 4 good games. And what's even better about this, Timmy watches Benjamin have 1 good game and says, I want to sign that guy to whatever I can. It turns out that he can only sign him to a 2-year contract because he has a kicker taking up his other 3-year spot. He likes a wide receiver so much, he wants to sign him immediately for as long as he can, although he can't sign him for as long as he hopes, because a kicker is taking up that other contract spot. And yet, Timmy manages his team better than Scott does. As for the defense thing, look, Gary runs this league straight and true. He's an honest guy. He's always clear with us about what's going on. We've seen other guys, namely Brian Williams, make moves after the games have started, but then we find out post-fact that the move was put in before the games had started. Gary, of course, just had to throw it in. It happens. It's not a big deal. The thing last night between Scott and Timmy over email, one of those rare arguments where both sides are wrong. I mean, you don't see that a lot outside of a Republican primary. Scott is wrong for insisting that Timmy did something wrong. Timmy did email Gary before the game started. I mean, what Timmy really did wrong was draft the Jaguars in the 4th round and then need 13 days of regular season time to figure out that was a terrible move and maybe I should get rid of those guys. Jaguars have scored -3 points this week. Timmy, on the other hand, is wrong for essentially being a child. When we wake our kids up in the morning, we get them breakfast, we tell them, get dressed, get your shoes on, get your socks on. You got to go back. Are your shoes and socks on? Have you eaten your breakfast? Drink your juice. Turn the TV off. Do you have your books? We have to manage them because they're children. Timmy is a full-grown adult. I don't have much insight into Timmy's personal life, thankfully, but I can assure you that I have much more going on in my personal and professional lives. I'm busier. I got more things to think about. I got more things to do. I got more things to make sure that are done. And yet, I managed to make my moves and know my contract spots and set my lineups without Gary's help, without Gary having to check on me to make sure I'm doing things okay. Don't be a human being, a full-grown adult, that is burdensome. Don't be a person that when you're gone, whether gone for the league or dead, people are like, whew, thank God that's over with. Don't drag other people down to your level. Be responsible enough to put your moves in with more than 15 minutes to go before kickoff. You know the Jaguars' defense is terrible. This wasn't a sudden development. They didn't suddenly lose 6 guys in a bus crash. You could have cut them at any point during the week. And again, it was an honest move. It was legally done. It's fine. It didn't make a difference in this game. Don't be burdensome. Don't be that person. Don't be awful. A little bit of life advice for everybody, frankly, but in this case, especially Timmy. Little baby Jesus, 65.4. Animal House, 51.9. Wow. Little baby Jesus gets the win. Thank you, Aaron Rodgers, for your 26.3 points. By the way, again, another reason I'm not so upset about losing this week. I would have beaten either one of these teams. I would have beaten about 5 different teams this week. Again, it's all scheduling. That's how it goes. And that's how it'll be until Gary finally adopts my proposal where Each team plays every other team every week. 11 potential games going on. And that's where your points will really matter. Gronk, only 3 points, not getting as much out of him as he wanted. Ellington, another nice game with 10 points. Trent Richardson, 8.5 points last night. This was his best game as a Colt. And I mean literally. Now, maybe it's because the Eagles' defense is not that good that the Colts were comfortable giving Trent 19 carries, which he still averaged under 4 yards a carry. He is terrible. If somebody is on him, he's going down. He needs to be out of this league. Reggie Bush, only 3 points. Fitz, only 5 points. Broncos defense, only 1 point. James Jones, 16 points on the bench, and managed to fumble twice on the same play. You don't see that very often. Hardly ever, in fact. Sammy Watkins, 17 points on the bench. A lot of points left on the bench. Did not matter for the LBJs because Animal House, what happened? Where did your team go? Seahawks, D, 0. Jamal Charles, sprained ankle, went out early, 1.2 points. Here's the good news. He's also probably going to be out this week. Roddy White, 4.2 points. I warned you about that Atlanta team on the road outdoors. Tom Brady, 8.9 points, 149 passing yards. It might be time to move on mentally from Tom Brady being in the high-scoring fantasy QB conversation. You could probably trade Dree Archer for Geno Smith and upgrade at the QB position there. Macklin, he did get in the end zone. He had 10 points. He could have even more if Foles wasn't holding him back. What can I tell you? And it's not like Animal House left a lot of points on the bench. Only 11 total on the bench. All of a sudden, Animal House looking a little shaky. Looking a little iffy. It looked good last week with 94 points. But this is bad. 51.9. I mean, that's Scott territory. We got to do something about this. But little baby Jesus, 1-1. Kudos to them. So there you go. Another busy week is in the books. Lots going on the field. Lots going on in the training room. Lots going on in the email threads. We are really looking forward to week 3.